Hey, you guys, it's Tim Suttle here, pastor of Redemption Church, and I've been getting a few requests, emails, and texts and stuff from folks who are realizing we need to establish a whole new routine as a family here in the midst of the COVID-19 virus shutdown. And so they've been asking for my teaching, both for them and just to share around, because we're all kind of going through this. And so I've written a blog post at my blog, Paperback Theology, but I thought I'd make a quick video and just run through kind of a primer on the teaching we've done a lot at Redemption Church on how we do routines and how we think in terms of our own Christian discipleship, of why routines are important and what Christian practices need to be part of every day. So I'm just going to do this real quick. Hopefully it'll be something that you can maybe sit down with your family or just you personally go through, and something you could share around with other folks. Because this virus quarantine or social distancing has really laid waste to our routines. And it looks like it's going to be this way for a while. And so we need to try to establish new routines. And there's an opportunity here. I shared this earlier in an email with the church, that there's this author, Rebecca Solnit, who says that inside the word emergency is the word emerge. And she writes this, she says, "From an emergency, new things come forth. The old certainties are crumbling fast, but danger," she says, "danger and possibility are sisters." That in this kind of emergency, there is a possibility of something new coming in to be. Something new can emerge from this time, and this isn't all bad. I mean, some of this can be rough, but some of this can be good. And part of what is going to determine which it is will depend upon our routines, the habits and rhythms of our daily life. And part of our work right now, some of the most important work we need to do right now, is to establish new healthy routines that can help make us human as human was intended to be. One of my favorite authors, Annie Dillard, wrote this thing, and I try to say this multiple times a year from up front. She wrote, "How we spend our day is, of course, how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour or that one is what we are doing." It kind of becomes what we are doing, right? Aristotle knew this thousands of years, or at least a couple thousand years earlier. Only he would add a wrinkle. He would say how we spend our days is, in a sense, who we are becoming as people. The way you structure your life is going to shape what kind of person you become out into the future. And Aristotle believed that humans aren't slaves to destiny or victims of our own character, that we can put our hands to those things and shape them. And the way that we do this is as easy as something like learning to drive. In fact, it's something I sometimes call it the habit loop or the character loop. I'm going to just show this to you for a second. This is what we're talking about. You can maybe screenshot that or something. I usually put it on a marker board. This is what we're going to go through. And it all starts with practice. So, first time you sat behind the wheel of a car, you sucked at driving, I'm guessing. That's why we made you start in parking lots where you wouldn't kill somebody, because you need to practice. And all kind of routine starts with practice, or healthy routines that can make us human as human was intended, start with practice. I still remember the first time I drove, just how weird it was. You try to do something like just hit the accelerator, and you don't know how hard to push. Sometimes it's too much, sometimes not enough. Same with the brake, the steering wheel. You're judging, you're in your head thinking of every little thing that it does. And you can't execute at first all the things that you're trying to do. You're bad. You need to practice. And you need a couple of things. You need a teacher who can, help you with pointers on how to drive, and also how we've agreed to share the road together. And you need a space to fail. That's what practice is about. But after a few weeks of practicing, it'll move from practice to habit. So you move on to the side streets, and you figure out, you don't always know when to hit the gas or the brakes, but when you decide to do that, you know how you can perform that action, right? So now driving has become a habit. And if you keep going for a few months, it will kind of, the ability to drive migrates from your conscious brain down to your lizard brain. They call this in brain science automaticity. And driving becomes for you a reflex. This is why you can like leave your workplace and drive home like 20 minutes later. It's like you wake up in your driveway thinking, how did I get here? Like, I don't remember anything from that drive. And this is because you were driving as a reflex. And so a reflexive activity it's interesting because it travels, it's transferable to other situations. So for instance, when driving as a reflex, if you learn to drive in a car, you can jump in a pickup truck and you don't have to learn how to relearn how to drive, right? Or if you go to like the mountains and are on a Jeep trail or a dirt road, you know how to navigate that because driving's a reflex. And then a strange thing happens, and I think it's interesting with a car. You start to realize, I really like this ability to drive. I want to be able to drive. I like that it allows me freedom to explore. It lets me connect relationally. It lets me have a job. It's always a way, or just I get to have the joy of driving. I love driving. So driving ends up weaving its way into our desires and even our loves. And we are fired into the world by our desires and by our loves. And so it follows this predictable pattern. What starts as a practice becomes a habit, then a reflex, and then becomes desire and love, and just becomes part of our character. At some point we just say, I am a driver. I know how to drive. It's part of what I do. It's part of my life. And in the practice phase, you need a teacher and a place to fail. In the habit phase, you're moving toward either good habits or virtues, bad habits or vices. And in the reflex phase, you learn this is transferable and it's somehow supported by a community. Let me talk more about that. Let's say instead of driving, it's something like patience. Let's say that you're reorganizing your time here in the COVID-19 reality and you want to become a more patient person. How might you do that? Well, what you need to do is find a practice that you can do. So stand in the longest line at the grocery store or something else, something that makes you wait. Like if it's time to cook, if 5:30 you start dinner every night, instead of starting dinner, sit down, set a clock and sit there for 3 or 4 minutes and just be patient. That would be like a practice. And you'll stink at it at first. But if you do it every single day, it'll become like a habit, something you can do. You'll find it's not hard. In fact, later on, it'll become a reflex. When it's 5:30, you just sit down, sit in quiet for a moment, be patient, practice patience, and you'll find I actually like being patient. And if you can move it all the way to where it's a reflex, what you'll find is it's transferable. So anytime you're in a situation that demands patience, you'll know how to do it because patience will become a reflex. The other thing you'll notice is communal in nature. You'll notice that you enjoy patient communities. That's because there is almost always a community at work behind any virtue, like a family or a church or a workplace or a classroom or a team that will train its members to embody the character of the group. So if you want to become a patient person, you need to find a patient community. And then when you, let's say, go home for Thanksgiving to your family of origin and you didn't grow up in a patient household, you'll realize, man, I do not like the way this feels. And you'll find it's hard to actually practice patience in this impatient community. And you realize when you head back to your old place, man, I love this patient community. In fact, I love patience. I love all that it does for me. That's how you know patience is now wired to your character, because you will chase the things you love. You will chase after in your life the things you desire. You'll try to embody them and you practice them in your daily life. And how you spend the day is, in a sense, how you spend your life, is who you are becoming. This is why habits and rhythms and practices are so powerful and transformative, because we are fired into the world by our desires, by the things that we love. There's this writer, Ronald Rolheiser, who says it this way. He says, actually, spirituality is not about rationally choosing activities like going to church or praying or meditating, reading spiritual books, or setting off on some spiritual quest. Spirituality, is far more basic. Spirituality concerns what we do with desire. How do we shape our desires? And what Aristotle said, and people have known ever since then, is that we are not victims of our own desires. We shape our desires through what we practice. It becomes a habit and a reflex, and then a desire and a love. But of course, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour or this day or this season in our lives, that where our routines are changed, is going to be part of who we become into the future. And so nothing could be more important at this time than structuring our lives in a very intentional way. And I have just a simple methodology that I often teach on how to do this. It starts like this. First, you have to decide what matters to you in the world. And you can do a whole exercise. I'm sure you can make up something with your family or just on yourself to sit down and think about what matters. I often just use these categories: God, others, self, and nature. And this is, in a sense, the four essential relations of the person. As a self, I relate to self to God, self to other people, self to myself, and self to the created order. And so how we begin is we just divide a paper up into 4 sections, right? God, other, self, and nature at the top of the paper. And then just begin to list all of the practices you already do in your regular life or used to do in your life before COVID that feed into that relationship. What are the practices that help you connect relationally to God, to others, to yourself, to the world? Just brainstorm a list of things that you used to do. Write them down on your paper. And then brainstorm a list of things you could do here in our kind of new reality. When our ways of relating are going to be changed here for a while. It's brainstorming, so you're not judging, you're not saying this isn't realistic. Just fill up the page with a list. That's step 1. What are the practices you could engage in to relate to God, self, others, in the world? Step 2. Take a step back and look at your list. Underline the things that you think can survive into this new reality. And cross out the things you're like, I'm never going to do that. Or this can't survive in our new situation. So you're going to sort through the list. You're going to kind of cull, and you're going to kind of narrow it down to maybe 3 or 4 in each list that seem either to be things you're already doing and can carry on, or ones you might like to do and are realistic for this time. Now, you have to be careful here. To be realistic about your capacity. You can't start 25 new habits this week. We're talking about 2 or 3 little things, maybe even down to 1. If you try to do a whole bunch, you'll crash and burn. So be choosy. Hone in on practices that you think would be very fruitful and very doable for you, and limit yourself to just a few. So you have those underlined now, everything else crossed out. Now step 3. Go through the list of underlined practices and label them with whether you think this might be a daily practice, a weekly, monthly, maybe quarterly, yearly. Just label them. So I always just put like a little D with a circle around it on things that are like, this is a daily practice. Like say midday prayer. My alarm's going to go off at noon. I'm going to stop and either do a prayer liturgy or at least just say the Lord's Prayer. That seems like something I can do every day. Label that with a D. If it's like family vacation, that's going to happen maybe yearly. So you label that with a Y. So just go through the ones you have underlined here, label them day, week, month, year, like that. All right. Now step 4. Now you've identified rhythms that you think are realistic and important. You've labeled them daily, weekly, monthly, so on. Now you find a way to insert those practices into your schedule. Wire those practices to your schedule. And there are 2 ways to do this. And this really depends on whether your day-to-day schedule is consistent or whether it varies a lot. If your day-to-day schedule, say Monday through Friday especially, is really consistent, then you just schedule these practices. Put them in your calendar. Set alarms. Be reminded some way. So you just schedule them into your day, and then if every day is pretty much the same, you'll be able to do these daily practices, or same thing with weekly. If your weekly pattern is consistent, then you insert these into your schedule and set reminders. If your schedule is inconsistent, like it varies widely from day to day, then you have to think about it more like a checklist. So I like to use the example of like the difference between like basketball and baseball. So basketball goes by the clock. The game is over in basketball when the clock runs out. But in baseball, there's no clock. You don't go by the clock. There are just certain things that have to be accomplished before the game is complete. There has to be 9 innings, 3 outs per team. There has to be a clear winner at the end. So if your schedule is constantly changing, you want to construct a routine. It's more like baseball. So there are these 5 or 6 things every day, and my day is not complete until I do these things. And then the first thing you do in the morning is sit down and look at your schedule and find a way to, you just enter those into your day that day. So you're, instead of a consistent daily schedule that's true for every single day, you have this checklist of things you're going to do. And you still want to sit down at the beginning of the day and plug them into your schedule so you get the reminders. You want the alarm going off on your phone telling you it's time to do this or that. But it's more like a checklist. My day's not complete until I do this thing. Now, we used God, others, nature, self, those relationships. You could also use virtues like faith, hope, and love, or the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, all those. Or there's a list of things, the mind of Christ that Paul says we put on in Colossians chapter 3. So it's like compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness. You can look at any of those things. Maybe you'll want to take one of those, put them at the top of a list. Like, I need to be more patient. And then do the same thing. You brainstorm, just run them through that 4-step process. Now, for Christians, there are some practices that are non-negotiable. And there are, there are 2 main ones and a few more that I might suggest. So I'll start with the 2 main ones. These are non-negotiable. The first one is Sabbath keeping. You're starting a new schedule. My guess is that Sabbath keeping was at best inconsistent before. You have a chance now to make keeping of Sabbath a keystone habit in your life. Whatever your new schedule is, start with Sabbath. You need one 24-hour day where instead of working all the time and generating your own existence, you go into a completely different space where instead of generating, you're receiving your life. And instead of anxious, scurrying about and worrying, you delight in the goodness of being alive. Delight in the goodness of being a child of God. You know what I mean? That's the Sabbath thing. People think Sabbath means no work. Really, Sabbath means no anxiousness. It means delighting in the goodness of being alive in your relationships. It's enjoying the day. So that's number one. Sabbath is the first practice. And Sabbath, by the way, hits all 4 of these. Sabbath keeping determines your relationship with God, self, others, and the world. So that's the first one. The second one might surprise you, but it is tithing. And the reason tithing has been such a consistent practice is that money is the chief rival god in American society. I mean, the other thing that we trust in place of trusting in God most of the time is money and material possessions and the safety and security that comes from being wealthy or having cash, right? Tithing is this practice of, tithing means tenthing. It's taking 10% off the top and we give it as an offering to the church. And it has the result of subverting money as the place from which we draw our life and our safety and our security. And it does many things, but a couple of things. One is tithing 10% makes the other 90% holy. It also makes our work holy. Like there are times when you're working, you can say 1/10 of my work, even though I'm working at Sprint or some other place for the school district, I'm working for the church 1/10 of the time. So it makes work holy. And the other thing is it just subverts the god of consumerism and the god of mammon, of money. And it just kind of snips the chain that's tied to our ankle, where the other end is tied to our money, and it's dragging us to the bottom of the ocean. It just snips that and sets us free. So that's the other practice, tithing. There are other Christian practices like weekly worship, Sunday worship, put that on your schedule right away. It's one of the most important things you can do. Other things, I would say tithing, or actually it's Sabbath keeping and tithing are these personal disciplines. And then weekly worship is a corporate discipline that we submit ourselves to. And then another Christian practice that I think is important is daily prayer, fixed hour prayer. If you want more information on this and what it means, you can go to redemptionchurchkc.com or the Redemption Church KC podcast. And there is a class, a 4-part class called A Guide to Christian Prayer. And it can give you more of a basic introduction to fixed hour prayer. Basically what it means is that whether I feel like it or not, 3 times a day, I stop what I'm doing and pray. And I pray, not my own words, but I pray a liturgy. Okay, so those are just a few practices you might want to do. All right, last thing. I want to encourage you to sit down with your family in this time and go through and construct a new daily routine. Kristen and I did this with our 2 boys the other day. We had some time in the car and we started into this. And I got to tell you, it got a little tense. There were some emotions flaring. Like, this is an intense thing to try to reimagine what a healthy schedule looks like. I mean, we could treat the next however many weeks and months we're going to be kind of in social distancing. We could treat it like every day is Saturday. But if you're like me, I don't make the best choices on Saturday. I sort of let myself go on Saturday. I think I need to make some wiser choices. And so we're going to need to sit down together and talk about what time are we going to get up in the mornings? What time are we going to go to bed? When are we going to eat our meals together? We need to establish, we establish some electronic free gaps in our schedule where we just put the television, the screens, the phones, everything to the side and just relate face to face. And we talked about when we're going to exercise. How do I get alone time if I need to just be away from people? How do we check in with each other and share how it is that we're doing, how we're feeling? We just drew up this schedule and said, I know we're just kind of making this up, but these are the practices that we need to become healthy human beings. And so you're going to want to do those around work and rest and play and food and all of those things, but you want to do that also around how you relate to God, each other, self, and the world. So there'll be Christian practices that you want to put in there. Now, once you've done this, post it. Put it up somewhere, hang it up, or throw it online, or text it to some friends so they can keep you accountable. And once you have done this, you have constructed what the ancients called a rule of life, or a rhythm of life, or what Andy Dillard called a net for catching days, a way to redeem the day, redeem the time. And the reason I think this is so important is this. There's no way any of us can possibly anticipate what this coming time is going to require of us. I mean, none of us have lived through a pandemic like this before. And we can't anticipate every situation and decide ahead of time how we're going to react. The only way we're going to react appropriately is to somehow establish a healthy rhythm of practice, habits, things that become reflexes and desires that become woven to our character, and to slowly become a people who are a virtuous people, who just respond to the world naturally the way Jesus would respond if he were in our shoes. That's the goal here, is to see our character conform to the image of Christ. And it's as simple as learning to drive a car. Now, it's not easy. It's not quick and easy, but anybody can do it, just like anybody can drive. It just requires working through this slow progression of practice, at which we're terrible, and then habit, and then reflexes, and hopefully then the desire to live a certain way. I want to finish with this quote, and then I'll be done. It's from a book called Patterns by a guy named Mel Lorenz. He says this: all of life is built on patterns. In the natural world, bees form their honeycombs, robins piece together their nests, trees add ring upon ring, geese migrate north and then south, planets loop around the sun, all in progressive and wonderfully consistent patterns. Some set patterns seem to be purely the joyful expression of the exuberant creator, the waves of sand in the desert, the waves of water in the ocean, the orderly and vivacious bands of color of the rainbow. And then there are chosen patterns. That's what we're talking about. The behaviors that shape our character, form our reputation, and determine our satisfaction in life. These are our habits. How many hours do you sleep at night? Do you smoke cigarettes throughout the day? Do you pray? How do you speak to your parents, your spouse, or your kids? How do you respond to stressful circumstances? What do you do when you feel angry? What do you read? What are you expecting to happen when you go to church? This list could go on, because anything we do in life with any kind of repetition is a life pattern, whether it builds us up or tears us down. And there's the rub, he says. A good pattern progressively builds us up, but a bad pattern relentlessly erodes our humanity, like ocean waves pounding a coast. Being unaware of our life patterns is about the biggest gamble, he says, that any of us could take. I think that we can all agree we're going to need a new routine for a while, that the old routine is sort of out the window. And there's a sense in which this is rough and we need to grieve it, and it's going to be hard. But there's a sense in which from this emergency, something new is going to emerge. And like Aristotle says, we are free to put our hands to it and shape who it is we are becoming. And the way we do this is by constructing together a routine, a rhythm of life, a rule of life that helps us to learn how to relate rightly to God, to each other, to the self, and to the world around us. I hope this is helpful information to you guys. Please go through it maybe with family or friends. Share it around with anybody you think could use it. Let me know if there's anything I can do. You can contact me at tims@redemptionchurchkc.com. And again, if you want more information about the Christian practices and ways to pray, head to redemptionchurchkc.com or to our podcast and look for a guide to Christian prayer. It's a 4-part class that you can walk through. Peace of Christ, everyone. I hope you have a good week, and I hope you have fruitful conversations about your daily rhythms.